So we can't be here today without discussing Jimmy Savile. Are you over talking about it?
Well, I'm totally willing to talk about it in the sense that it's something I think about a lot. And I've got a book coming out later this year, and about 7 chapters are about Jimmy Savile. So it'd be a bit weird to not talk about it. It's something that, in terms of my professional career, I would count it as sort of the strangest and most upsetting event to have been in any way involved in.
Well, you liked him, didn't you? You got to know him
quite
well.
I have to pick my words very carefully, because sometimes you're like, well, you were his friend, and I would never really call myself his friend in a straightforward way. We were friendly. I have friendly feelings towards him, and I don't so much mean after when we made the program. The program, I think, is a strong program. It doesn't really get repeated, for obvious reasons. But I watched it since everything came out, and it's still a hard-headed bit of journalism. My exec at the time, Kevin Sutcliffe, had come from Panorama, and his attitude all through the process was like, we're absolutely gonna do a proper sort of bit of journalism about this guy. Like a lot of people, we found. At that time, Jimmy Savile was viewed as sort of certainly by younger people, as a sort of irritating old fart, really, who was like constantly going on about charity and not very funny and kind of cavorting around with royalty, and so the idea was like, let's get maybe slightly callow way. Let's go on. Let's see what we can find out about this guy, and while sort of slightly poking fun at him. Anyway. The program also shows him. We did, some filming of him after hours, where he reveals himself to have locked people up in the boiler room of his nightclub in Leeds and been questioned by the police about it. So there's very revealing things in it. Afterwards, for about a year afterwards, because he sort of said he liked the program, he agreed to do publicity, and then I would still see him. I saw him maybe 3 or 4 times in Leeds afterwards, to do bits of publicity, to launch a DVD, to film a little mini documentary. Funnily enough, the last time I was in Edinburgh in 2002, we made a mini documentary called When Jimmy Met Louis, in which he sort of turned the tables on me, and we filmed him at my house, going around and asking me questions. And he was always sort of happy to be kind of in my orbit, and I think saw me as a little bit of as a sort of piece of, as a way of staying relevant. Anyway, and it was during that time, so I began to see him as, I suppose, a sort of, in some way, and defined as broadly as I can, sort of, in some way okay, like he's an okay guy. And if someone said to me about him, like, he's a wrong 'un, isn't he? And I'd say, like, well, I'm not really sure.
Let's watch a clip,
okay.
Then we'll discuss that. Oh, God, I mean, it's so hard to watch. How did it feel for you personally to know that because I feel like when I'm watching that clip of you and him in the car, I feel like there's a part of you that doesn't believe him. And maybe I'm wrong, but you're questioning him. And
well, what he's saying doesn't make any sense.
No.
What you're seeing, I'm saying like that doesn't. The weird thing about that first clip is that he's bringing up the idea that, he says, to put salacious tabloid people off the hunt. And I'm like, well, where did that come from? Do you know what I mean? In other words, like, I would never have initiated a conversation in which I said, like, a lot of people pass around rumours that you may be a paedophile. Like, I wouldn't have, there wasn't enough to go on to make that a legitimate topic of inquiry, in my view. But what happens instead is I say, well, why are you always saying, like, you hate children? It seems a really weird thing to say. He says, like, to put salacious tabloid people off the hunt. And then I say, what, are you talking about the whole rumours of you being a paedophile? He goes like, oh, yeah. And that was the kind of the hallmark of his offending, was that he was so weirdly brazen, and his ability to kind of just sort of address it and appear to be and take a position and sort of that seems completely bizarre. I'm like, well, that just seems so implausible. Doesn't make any sense. He goes, well, it's worked a dream, and his ability to sort of not be wobbled by that.
Yeah.
So when he was questioned by the police, when victims came to see him, or their parents, or anyone confronted him, on those times over the sort of 40 or however many years of his offending, because there were occasions on which people did come and confront him, and he had that ability to just brazen it out.
I don't want to linger on Jimmy for too long, if that's okay, because I feel like it's defined you quite a lot in that space of the way that you cope and deal and interview and your responses to people. But I would like to just refer to a tweet you did about Michael Jackson that I've got two questions I want to ask you about this. One is, did you feel an obligation to support victims of abuse after your Jimmy experience, which is why you kind of wrote quite a bold tweet? I hope everyone can read that up there. But do you think that your experience with Jimmy kind of inspired that tweet a little bit? I
think it was part of what I felt. I had in a strange sense, I suppose I felt I had a little bit of a responsibility, having had, without seeking it out, a kind of education in how grooming works and how abuse often takes place. And I feel one of the most upsetting things for me is when you go through Twitter and you see the level of abuse directed at Dan Reed, the director of Leaving Neverland, and the strange kind of obtuseness of how many people, I assume through ignorance, and also I think, by the way, through a kind of self-grooming, their inability to see that the process of recognizing yourself as a victim sometimes takes time. And so people will say, like, you're inconsistent, or Wade Robson wanted to choreograph a Michael Jackson tribute show 2 years before he came out and said, I've been abused. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And you think, if you actually understood how mixed up we are as people and the way in which your circuits get scrambled, you'd see that makes complete sense. And I think, without going off too much about Leaving Neverland, I think one of the extraordinary things about it was the way in which you saw that grooming process, and the fact that one of the kids, James Safechuck, appeared still to be somewhat in love with Michael Jackson. And so, yes, I thought I'm going to take because I generally resist doing tweets that I know will be controversial or divisive, but I thought on this one, I'm going to stick my head above the parapet and take a stand.
I'm going to take a question. They've now disappeared, so I'll come back to that. Actually, on that, the other thing I wanted to ask you about that, you've got a very long-standing relationship with the BBC.
Yes.
I have friends who work from the BBC who feel they really have to watch what they say publicly and they might get into trouble, or that the BBC might not be happy about it. Do you ever feel that?
I have to acknowledge the fact that the BBC's been very kind to me, and that over the 20 or 25 years I've worked at the BBC, there have been times when, I've been through 6 or 7 different BBC Two channel controllers. I started with Michael Jackson, funnily enough. That's a very in joke. It's a TV industry crowd, come on guys. The controller of BBC Two used to be called Michael Jackson.
Really?
It's a fact,
I didn't know that.
And then 6 or 7 controllers later, it's Patrick Holland. And over the years, I've had little fallow spells. There've been times when I was, especially towards the end of the When Louis Met era, when no celebrities would agree to be filmed with me. About a year went by when I didn't really make any programs.
Right.
And I was under contract, so the BBC couldn't exactly fire me, but they were very, I never felt as though they gave me too much of a hard time about it. So to answer your question, I don't feel any huge need to be very careful. Like, in other words, I don't feel I have to choose my words. Do you know what I mean?
I do, yes. I do. I'm going to take a question because I can see them again now. Right. I'd like to know the answer to this. When you interview, what are your best tips and tricks?
I think the best one was something I picked up at TV Nation, and it's really to do with capturing as much as you can, in the sense of, when I started, I didn't know, this was the only way I knew how to work, so I didn't realize there was another way of working, but it was the idea that you arrive, you get out of the car, maybe you call the contributor and say, we're here and we're filming, and they're like, oh, okay then, and then you get out, and the DOP gets out, he's holding his camera, it's running, you step out, he films you getting out, you go to the door, you knock, the guy says, I'm still in my pajamas. And you're like, okay, sorry about that, we'll knock again in a few minutes. He comes back, you go in, and then you just keep filming more or less everything that happens for the following 3-4 hours. So in other words, whereas I think for some TV makers that and it's a valid way of working. There's a way where you say, like, we're going to knock on the door, like, okay, we're just going to set up, and we'll be filming, you know, in about half an hour. At which point he's not in his pajamas. Do you know what I mean? You don't get those little unexpected bits of actuality. So it's that sense of opening the frame up, expanding the margins. You know, it goes back to John Noakes on his Nelson's columns, you know, where you see the cameras. It's that sense of just getting a little bit more flavour of authenticity, and the moments at the margins, or the unexpected moments, are often the most revealing.